Snow was falling in long, quiet streaks across the windshield, and the wind pressed against the truck like it was trying to warn me about something I refused to see. I sat there alone, watching the Christmas lights blur into trembling colors beating like the pulse of a secret ready to explode. This season should have been peaceful, but all week something was off. Not loud, not obvious. Just a shadow slipping through every room, every forced smile, every family conversation that ended too quickly. No one spoke it aloud, yet everything was already shifting out of place. Then my daughter climbed into the passenger seat, her cheeks flushed with cold, her eyes clear in a way that cut straight through the fog I'd been hiding behind. "Dad, can I ask you something?" One question, small enough to disappear inside the wind, but it split the night open and showed me everything I'd been trying not to face. I started the engine. And when the steering wheel trembled under my hands, I knew. That night wasn't just the beginning. It was the moment every buried truth in my family finally stepped into the light. The first thing I noticed that night was the wind pushing against the side of the truck, a low groan moving through the metal frame that made the steering wheel tremble under my hands. Main Street was washed in strings of Christmas lights blinking softly against the drifting snow, yet something in the air felt off, as if the season itself had stepped back and watched from a distance. Emily leaned toward the window, tracing slow circles on the frosted glass with her mitten. Her breath left small clouds that faded as quickly as they formed. For a long stretch of road, neither of us spoke. The heater hummed, the radio murmured an old December tune, and the world around us seemed to hold its breath in the half-light. "Dad." Her voice came soft from the passenger seat, light enough to leave room for me to pretend I had not heard it. I answered anyway, and before I could ask what she needed, the question left her lips with the weight of something she had been carrying since earlier in the week. She wanted to know why people celebrated Christmas if they forgot their elders. The words hit harder than she knew. I kept my eyes on the road, on the glowing reindeer perched above the pharmacy, on the wreath hanging slightly crooked from the town lamppost, yet my mind slid back to that family meeting. Mark's flat tone, Linda's quick nods, the way they insisted we focus on the kids this year and let Dad rest, the way neither of them met my eyes when they said it. I asked Emily what made her think Grandpa was being forgotten. She rested her chin on her shoulder and watched the snow fall past the glass while she spoke. She had overheard Mark talking to a man in a gray coat near the kitchen. She remembered their voices low. She remembered a few words. Grandpa was easier to deal with when he was weak. She repeated it like a line from a book she did not understand, but her innocence cut the meaning clean and deep. The truck slowed as we passed the courthouse, where the town tree stood tall and bright. Emily stared at it with the quiet wonder only an 8-year-old can keep intact. I could feel her waiting for an answer she trusted. I gave her the one that hurt the least, that Grandpa was resting at home, but the lie felt thin in my mouth. I pulled into the empty lot beside the community center. Floodlights cast long white shadows across the snow. We sat there without speaking. My hands still wrapped around the wheel, Emily's gaze still fixed on the world outside. She had nothing more to say, and I could not find a single word that would not break something open too soon. When we got home, she ran upstairs, trailing the smell of cold air and wool. The house was dim except for the Christmas tree blinking in the living room, the lights catching on the empty armchair Harold always used when he visited. The sight of it pulled something tight beneath my ribs. I walked down the hall to the back room where I kept the small box of tools Dad brought me last year. He had insisted on setting up a little camera near my porch, said winter nights made him uneasy. I had not checked the footage in months. The device ran on an old battery pack and should have died long ago. I logged in on my phone. The feed was dark, but a new file sat at the top of the list. The date was yesterday. My thumb hovered over it long enough for my breath to slow. A thin strand of cold crept along my spine. The first frame appeared, the front walk of Harold's house, snow building along the railing. A tall shadow stretching toward the door like a thought that did not belong there. I stood still in the quiet room. Lights from the tree flickered softly against the hallway wall. Outside, the wind shifted and brushed the siding with a hollow sound, the kind that makes a man notice the silence before it breaks. That was how the night ended. Me alone with a frozen shadow on a glowing screen and the faint hum of December pressing against the windows. And in that small, suspended moment, I felt the first crack of something long buried rise toward the surface. The house felt too still the moment I stepped inside, the kind of stillness that settles right after a door closes, and every conversation in the next room cuts itself in half. I heard the muted clatter of dishes, the soft rumble of the dishwasher, and a brief dip in the noise, like someone deciding whether to keep talking or let silence win. Warm air drifted out from the kitchen, thick with cinnamon and cloves, a scent that should have carried me back to winters when Mark and I burned our tongues on hot cider, yet tonight it only tightened something in my chest. I wiped my boots on the mat and walked in slowly, letting my eyes adjust to the soft yellow lights strung above the cabinets. My niece noticed me first. She peeked from behind the counter with cookie crumbs on her lip. Her smile slipped for a second before she lifted her hand in a small, unsure wave. I nodded back and kept moving. Mark stood by the dining table adjusting a stack of plates that didn't actually need adjusting. When he looked up, the smile he gave me looked rehearsed, the kind a man offers when he hopes it will hide whatever he doesn't want seen. He patted my shoulder, as if greeting a distant neighbor rather than his own brother. "Glad you made it," he said, though his voice frayed at the edges just enough for me to notice. Before I could ask where Dad was, his attention shifted to the man seated at the end of the table. Gordon Hale. I recognized the gray coat hanging behind him, the same shade Emily had mentioned the night before. He rose with a practiced confidence, his handshake firm, his eyes steady in a way that felt more assessing than welcoming. Linda hovered at the counter arranging cheese slices into perfect lines. Her hands moved fast, too fast, as if she needed something to do to explain their shaking. Gordon talked warmly about holiday chaos, about how older relatives often struggled with the excitement, about how families sometimes found relief in letting a professional team help for a short while. His tone had a polished ease, but beneath it was an empty ring, the sound of a salesman who had already decided how the evening should end. Mark nodded at every sentence, the agreement coming too quickly like he had practiced it. He wouldn't meet my eyes. His jaw flexed each time I shifted in my seat. I asked again where Dad was. The question cut through the kitchen air. The kids stopped laughing. Linda froze mid-motion, holding a slice of cheese like she had forgotten what she meant to do with it. Even the dishwasher seemed to quiet. She finally answered, eyes still lowered. She said Dad had been forgetful, that he mixed up names more often, that he sometimes scared the kids with strange stories. Her voice was thin, stretched tight around each word. Gordon folded his hands and leaned in, saying a temporary placement would help Dad stay safe through the holidays and give the rest of us a chance to breathe. Winter was dangerous for older adults, he said. Better to act before something went wrong. I did not respond. My eyes drifted to the refrigerator door where a photograph of Dad holding Emily, hung beneath a red cardinal magnet. The picture wavered in the kitchen light, and a hollow ache opened quietly beneath my ribs. Emily appeared then, tugging at my sleeve. She asked if she could sit with me. I lifted her into my lap. Her weight steadied me more than anything else in the room. She rested her head on my chest, her gaze moving from Gordon to Mark, then finally back to me. Mark cleared his throat. He said they had already discussed everything, that a calmer season would be better for all of us, that Dad needed rest. His voice did not match his words. It trembled faintly, like someone holding a door shut against a rising wind. I asked him why this conversation had happened without Dad. I kept my tone even, but the question scraped the air anyway. Linda flinched. Mark stared at the centerpiece. Gordon blinked once, slow and deliberate. No one answered. Emily shifted on my lap, sensing the change, even if she couldn't name it. The silence stretched until she whispered that she wanted another cookie. Linda rushed to get it, knocking a spoon to the floor. When she bent to pick it up, her fingers trembled so lightly I doubted anyone else noticed. I set Emily down and stood. The space between standing and reaching for my coat felt too long, stretched thin by every unspoken thing in that room. I could feel every eye on me, though none of them lifted their heads. Their attention stayed fixed on the table, the counter, the safe corners of the room. Outside, the cold met me sharply, carrying the faint scent of snow about to fall again. I paused by the truck and looked back. Through the window, the kitchen glowed with warm holiday light. From where I stood, the photograph of Dad looked small, almost swallowed by the brightness around it. For a moment, I thought someone moved behind the curtain, stepping forward, then stopping. Maybe Mark. Maybe no one at all. The curtain settled, and the porch light buzzed softly in the winter air. I climbed into the truck and wrapped my hands around the cold steering wheel. The engine rumbled awake, steady and low. As I pulled away, the porch light flickered once, just long enough to catch my eye, then steadied again. Something had shifted inside that house. I felt it in the tightness along my ribs and the hollow between my breaths. Whatever choices they had made about Harold were no longer ideas or whispers. They had taken shape before any of us spoke the truth aloud. And as the house slipped from the mirror into the dark, I knew the silence behind its walls held far more than anyone was willing to admit. The road to Harold Mercer's house felt narrower that night, the snow pushing in from both sides, like the world was slowly folding inward. The porch lights from the neighboring homes glowed in soft patches across the street, but the block itself was quiet, the kind of quiet that comes when people turn in early for winter. As I pulled up near the end of the street, a gust of wind rattled the bare branches above the hood of my truck, a small reminder that the cold had settled in for good. Dad's place sat under a weak glow from a bulb that flickered once, then steadied again. I watched it pulse while I sat in the cab, hands resting on the wheel, letting the heater's breath fade to a low hum. There was a smell to this neighborhood that I hadn't noticed in years, something like pine sap mixed with chimney smoke. It brought back memories too fast, the kind that land first in your chest before you can sort them out. I stepped out into the cold and heard the snow crunch under my boots. Before I reached the porch, the front door opened. Harold stood in the warm light, his hand still on the knob as if he had been waiting or listening. His flannel shirt hung loose on his shoulders, the cardigan frayed at the sleeves. The knit cap on his head made him look smaller somehow, but his eyes were clear and steady. "You came out in this weather," he said with a tired smile. I told him it wasn't too bad, and he gave a soft laugh that said he knew better. When he stepped aside, I walked into the familiar warmth. The heater clicked in uneven rhythm as it pushed out air, filling the house with a sound I'd known all my life. It smelled faintly of menthol tea-old carpet and cedar from the paneling he never replaced after Mom passed. The living room looked the same, just dimmer. The small Christmas tree in the corner blinked slower than it should have, as if the lights were on their last bit of strength. A few bulbs had gone dark. The glass star at the top leaned slightly, its hook bent. The wooden reindeer Mark carved in high school still hung unevenly from a branch, its paint chipped. As I looked around, I realized nothing in this house had been changed without a reason. That alone tightened something deep in me. Harold moved toward the kitchen, careful but determined. His steps were slower than I remembered each footfall, placed with thought. He reached into the cabinet for 2 mugs, his hand pausing mid-air, as if he needed a second to find his balance. I stepped forward, but he waved me off gently. He poured the tea, the steam curling up the faint tremble in his wrist, catching my eye. "Sit," he said. I sat. The chair creaked beneath me, that same familiar wooden groan from years ago. He took the seat across from me, instead of the head chair, the one that used to be his place during every holiday meal. That chair sat in the shadow, now tucked slightly back, as if no one had used it for weeks. He wrapped his hands around the mug and let out a long breath. "I wrote you something," he said. "Never sent it." His eyes flicked toward the drawer near the sink. He didn't get up immediately. He stared at the drawer the way a man looks at something he's both ashamed of and relieved to have. When he finally stood, it was slow, a small wince moving across his shoulder. He pulled the drawer open and reached inside, fingers touching several envelopes before selecting one. He set it gently on the table between us. The edges were worn. The paper had softened from being held too long. My name sat across the front in his neat block letters. "I meant to mail it in July," he said. I must have folded and unfolded it a dozen times. I traced the corner of the envelope with my thumb, feeling the thinness of the paper beneath the flap. "You could have called me," I said. He lifted the mug halfway, then lowered it again without drinking. "I didn't want to trouble you. Mark said you were busy, that you didn't need to worry about things here." I kept my eyes on the envelope. His voice carried no bitterness. That made it worse. When I opened the letter, the first lines were simple observations about the weather, the doctor, the neighborhood. Then the lines shifted, the handwriting lighter in some places, as if his hand had grown tired while writing. He described signing papers after the hospital, still foggy from medication. He wrote that he couldn't remember exactly what he'd signed, that he trusted Mark and didn't want to hold him up. He wrote about losing small things. The checkbook, the spare keys, a folder with property documents. He wrote that he felt foolish asking about them, worried that his own sons would see him as slipping. He wrote that once people decide you're slipping, they stop letting you choose anything that matters. The heater clicked again. The sound felt louder than before. I kept reading until the story curved toward something quieter. He wrote that the house was too quiet at night, that the Christmas lights across the street blinked longer than he could sleep. He wrote that he missed the noise of us boys running down the stairs on Christmas morning, the thud of our feet shaking the ornaments. He wrote he never thought he would one day be the part of the holiday people rearranged to make things easier. I looked up at him. He didn't speak. His eyes drifted toward the living room, toward the dim tree with its missing bulbs and crooked star. His shoulders sank a little as he exhaled a soft sound that felt like surrender. "Dad," I said quietly, "you're not in the way." He gave a faint smile, not believing or disbelieving, just absorbing the words like someone who had learned not to hope for too much. He reached for his mug again, holding it with both hands. The steam rose through the air, disappearing before it reached his face. "I thought about telling you sooner," he said. "I just didn't want there to be trouble between you and Mark. Families go through things. Sometimes it's best not to stir the pot." I didn't answer right away. I felt the weight of the envelope pressed against the table. The heater hummed, and the clock ticked steadily above the doorway. Outside, the wind brushed the siding with a dull thud, making the house tremble almost imperceptibly. When I finally folded the letter and slipped it into my jacket, it felt heavier than it should have. Harold watched me, his eyes tired but open. "Don't worry too much," he said. "I'm managing fine." But his voice softened at the end, and I couldn't tell if he meant the words for me or for himself. He walked me to the door. His steps were unsteady now, the day's fatigue showing in the way he leaned slightly on the wall as he moved. When he opened the door, the cold air swept in, stirring the hem of his cardigan. I stood on the porch, turning back once more. He was framed in the doorway, the warm light behind him flickering gently. His hand lingered on the doorframe just for a second longer than usual, as if he wanted to call out but couldn't find the right words. "Drive safe," he said. I nodded and walked toward my truck. When I looked back, he was still there, one hand gripping the frame, the other hanging loosely by his side. The wind caught his scarf and lifted it slightly before letting it fall. I started the engine and slowly pulled away. His porch light flickered again, then steadied. Through the mirror, his house grew smaller, the warm glow shrinking into a dot among the dark windows of the street. The letter pressed against my chest through my jacket. The night felt heavier, and in the silence of that drive, I knew something larger had begun to surface, something I could no longer ignore. The house felt colder than it should have when I stepped inside, as if the warmth from the vents had not quite caught up after the long drive back. I set my keys on the counter and waited a moment, listening to the quiet settling over the rooms. The heater kicked on with a soft rattle, a beat late, the same tired sound I had heard earlier in Harold Mercer's house. It slipped under my skin in a way I could not shake. I walked down the hallway and opened the closet door. The bulb flickered once before holding steady. The pine box sat on the top shelf, where Harold had placed it years ago. I pulled it down carefully, feeling the weight shift in my hands, the faint scent of old wood, lifting like something that had waited patiently. The Christmas tree lights blinked from across the room, casting slow bands of color across the table when I set the box down. For a moment, I just rested my hand on the lid, remembering how Mom used to open it each December, how she kept the ornaments inside that she would not let Mark or me handle when we were boys. I lifted the lid. The hinges gave a soft groan, familiar and weary. Inside the first layer was what I expected. Old holiday cards softened at the corners, ribbons knotted in loose coils, a glass angel with one chipped wing. The blinking tree lights washed the inside of the box, red, then green, then back to its natural brown. I moved the cards aside and reached deeper. My fingers brushed thin paper. When I pulled it free, I recognized Mom's handwriting, steady even in her final months. The page had been folded and unfolded many times, the crease worn pale. I opened it and felt the air tighten around me. It was a draft of her will. Not the final one, just a version she had written before the illness made writing difficult. My name sat at the top. She wrote that she trusted me. She wrote that I would know what to do if she could not. Her words carried her warmth in the same way her hands used to when she held my shoulders and steadied me. She wrote about Harold, too, about making sure he never felt alone. Then the lines shifted. The sentence began clearly, her pen moving without hesitation. But halfway through it faltered. Do not let your brother. The ink dragged thin, then stopped. The rest of the space was blank. She had crossed through the unfinished line with one firm stroke, darker than anything else she ever wrote. I traced the mark gently, feeling the pressure she must have used. I could picture her at the kitchen table near the window shawl wrapped around her, pausing mid-thought, either from pain or from something she could not bring herself to say aloud. A photograph slipped loose from behind the page and landed on the table. It was the four of us by the Christmas tree years ago. Mom's soft smile, Harold's hand resting on her shoulder, Mark standing tall and stiff beside her, and me in front grinning at a small toy helicopter I had begged for that year. The colors had faded, but her eyes in the photo still looked alive, watching me even now. I leaned back and let the quiet fill the room. The heater clicked again, the sound echoing through the house. The tree lights blinked slower, one of the bulbs near the bottom flickering, as if unsure whether to stay lit. I looked at the unfinished sentence and felt a cold weight settle deeper in me. Soft footsteps sounded on the hardwood. Emily stood in the doorway, her hair falling across her cheek, rubbing sleep from her eyes. She looked at the box, then at me. "You are still awake?" she said gently. I nodded and reached out a hand. She walked over and leaned against me, warm and small, in a way the world rarely allows for long. "Is that Grandma's?" she asked, staring at the pine box. "Something like that," I said, though the words tightened in my throat. "Is Grandpa okay?" She asked it the same way she had in the truck, soft, thoughtful, unsure if she should worry. I rested my hand on her back. "He will be," I said. "I hope so." She accepted the answer with a small nod and let her head rest on my chest. I walked her back to her room and tucked the blanket around her. Her breathing steadied almost immediately. When I stepped out, the hall light made her doorway glow softly behind me. In the dining room, the pine box waited. I folded the draft and placed it back inside, setting the photograph on top. Before closing the lid, I paused. The lamp flickered again, its glow rippling across the wood like a quiet warning. Outside, the wind shifted and brushed the siding with the same hollow push I had heard outside Harold's house. The coincidence settled into my chest like a stone. I carried the box back to the closet and set it on the shelf. My hand lingered on the lid, waiting, maybe hoping for something more to reveal itself. When I finally closed the closet door, the soft click echoed through the house. In the living room, the tree blinked its uneven pattern. One bulb went dark with a faint pop, barely audible. I sat down in the armchair, elbows on my knees, hands clasped. Something was moving beneath the surface now. Quiet, steady, unmistakable. Like the first cracks forming beneath winter ice before the lake shifts. I listened to the stillness, aware that whatever came next was already on its way. The sky had already turned the color of worn slate when I pulled up to Mark's house, the kind of winter light that drains the warmth out of everything it touches. A thin crust of snow covered the walkway, marked by footprints that had already begun to soften in the wind. Through the window, the Christmas tree blinked behind the curtains, but the rhythm was uneven, like the bulbs were arguing among themselves. When I stepped inside, the scent of cinnamon hit first thick and sweet, almost heavy enough to swallow the air. Under it lingered something sharper, one of the holiday sprays Linda always used. The house was warm, but not welcoming. It felt arranged, as if the comfort was staged for an audience that never arrived. Mark stood at the kitchen table, smoothing the sleeves of his shirt the way he always did before a difficult conversation. A glossy folder lay open in front of him, its surface reflecting a warped version of the overhead light. Linda sat to his right, both hands pressed to the table, her gaze fixed on a napkin she kept folding and unfolding. "You made it," Mark said. His voice was calm, but the tightness in his shoulders betrayed him. I took the chair near the window. Outside, the wind rattled the small wreath on the railing. Inside, a spoon resting in a mug gave a faint metallic tremble each time the furnace shifted. The room felt as though laughter and conversation had been scrubbed out of it just moments before I arrived. Mark opened the folder. A brochure slid forward, glossy and bright. Smiling seniors on manicured lawns, polished floors, holiday decorations placed with professional precision. Statewood Senior Living. Memory care available. Full medical staff. "Top of the line," he said. "They can help Dad settle in, at least for the winter." His tone held the kind of practiced steadiness a man uses when he has already made up his mind. I let the brochure sit untouched. Another document followed. Document. Thinner worn at the corners. Durable power of attorney. At the bottom, Harold Mercer's signature wavered, the ink unsteady, as if the pen had pulled away from him, rather than followed his hand. The final letter in his last name dipped low in a way that was not his style. He used to sign everything with slow certainty, no hesitation. "When did he sign this?" I asked. "The day he left the hospital," Mark said. "He wanted things handled quietly. He said not to bother you." A pulse of irritation moved across his jaw. Linda shifted in her chair, smoothing a strand of hair that did not need smoothing. She still did not look up. I checked the date. The final number carried a faint shadow, the kind that comes from writing over something. A correction. An attempt to hide it. "Why didn't Dad tell me?" I asked. "You always jump to the worst conclusions," Mark said. "Every time there's a decision to make, you treat it like an attack." "That is not what I asked." His eyes darted toward the window, then back to the folder. His fingers tapped the glossy cover, a quick, nervous rhythm he probably did not realize he was doing. Linda spoke with her voice held low. "He's confused sometimes. He gets turned around. The girls worry when he wanders at night." Her words trembled near the end. She looked toward the hallway, something unspoken tucked behind her eyes. Mark lifted another page. Something white and folded slipped beneath it. I reached out and pulled it free. A photocopy of the property deed. Harold's signature again, shaky and unfamiliar. Beneath it, another name. Mark Mercer. The transfer line incomplete, but unmistakable. The room stilled. "What is this?" I asked, though the answer sat between us like a weight. "Long-term planning," Mark said. "You're reading into it." His eyes avoided the deed entirely. He looked toward the stove, the counter, Linda, anywhere but at the paper. I placed the deed on the table, let the silence settle, then lifted my phone. I raised it just enough for the lens to catch the corner of the document. The shutter was barely audible, a soft click swallowed by the hum of the furnace. Still, Mark's shoulders twitched at the sound. "I think I should go," I said. He did not ask me to stay. He did not move. Linda attempted a smile, but it dissolved before it reached her eyes. The cinnamon scent clung to the air, suddenly too sweet, like something meant to cover the truth, rather than celebrate the season. Outside, the cold hit with a sharp clarity. I paused near the truck and looked back at the house. Their lights glowed warm behind the curtains, shadows moving faintly across them. For a second, someone passed near the upstairs window, the glass catching the porch light before the figure slipped away. I got into the truck, placing my hands on the wheel, letting the cold seep into my palms. The driveway light flickered once, then steadied. Whatever had started in that kitchen went deeper than a shaky signature or a glossy brochure. It was not a misunderstanding. It was not a suggestion. It was already becoming real, and now I had seen enough that I could not pretend otherwise. The December dusk had already settled low across the neighborhood when I pulled into Mark's driveway. The snow along the walkway had been pushed into the same neat lines he shaped every winter, the kind that suggested order, even when nothing else was in place. Light glowed behind the dining room curtains, warm but restless flickering, as if it were holding on against the cold, pressed up against the house. I stayed in the truck a little longer, watching the shadows move inside, steadying my breath before stepping out. The warmth in the entryway felt muted when I walked in. The scent of cinnamon was lighter this time, mixed with the heat rising from the oven. The whole house carried a quiet that wasn't peaceful, the kind that happens after too many conversations have been rehearsed, but not spoken. Linda moved between the counter and the stove, arranging dishes with hands that worked quickly, but without confidence. When she looked at me, her smile flickered, then disappeared as she turned back to the tray. Mark put down a carving knife when he saw me. His greeting landed softly polite, but hollow. He asked about the snow, about Emily's school play, the small talk of a man avoiding the real reason he invited me. I answered, though each word felt like it dropped into a space he didn't want filled. The kids lifted the room with their chatter. Emily sat beside her cousins, feet swinging lightly under the chair, her hair still carrying the scent of the cold outside. For a moment, it almost felt like any other family dinner. Almost. Dinner found its rhythm. The soft scrape of chairs, the clink of plates, the quiet hum of the heater pushing against the winter air. Mark passed the roast, his hand steady, until the conversation drifted near anything touching responsibility or Dad's future. The tension sharpened beneath every word he tried to soften. Linda folded her napkin, unfolded it, folded it again. Her glass of water stayed untouched. Every few seconds, she glanced at Mark, searching his face the way someone checks the sky before deciding if they should run for cover. A lull fell over the table. Mark cleared his throat. He said he might take the kids to visit Statewood next week. He said it casually, too casually, for a man who had nearly flinched when I photographed the deed days earlier. The kids grew quiet, sensing the shift, even if they didn't understand it. And then Emily set down her fork. She looked at Mark with a small, steady calm, the way children do when they are not trying to accuse anyone, only trying to understand what they heard. I heard you tell that man that Grandpa is easier to make sign things when he is weak. The room froze. Even the house seemed to stop listening to itself. The heater clicked off as if startled. The Christmas lights behind us flickered once, then steadied into a dim, uncertain glow. Linda dropped her knife. It hit the tile with a sharp clatter that echoed across the table. Mark stared at Emily, stunned for a breath. Then his expression tightened. The denial came too fast, too sharp. He said she was imagining it. His voice rose, then faltered as he caught himself. He looked down at his hands, flexing them slowly as if he could force the tension out before anyone else noticed. Emily frowned gently. She spoke even softer the second time. I wasn't imagining. I was getting cookies. Silence built around her words. A slow, crushing kind of silence. Linda pressed her napkin to her mouth, her eyes darting between Mark and the doorway as if she expected someone else to step in. Mark stared at the table, jaw clenched, breathing uneven. He did not correct her. He did not apologize. He said nothing. I felt something shift inside me, something I had been wrestling with for weeks. Anger, grief, guilt. All of it pulled tight by the sound of my daughter's voice cutting through the lies the adults had been stacking like cards. I told Emily she hadn't done anything wrong. My voice stayed low because anything louder would have broken open more than just the moment. She nodded and leaned slightly against my arm, still watching her uncle, as if waiting to see whether he would look back. Mark pushed his chair back. Too hard. The legs scraped the tile. He straightened the carving tray, even though nothing on it had moved. His hands shook for a second before he hid them under the edge of the table. Linda blinked rapidly, her breath tight, her gaze fixed on her napkin. The Christmas music in the next room ended mid-melody. The new song didn't start right away. The gap between them was long enough to make the silence feel like a decision. I stood. I said we were heading home. No one argued. No one even shifted in their seats. Emily put on her coat, slowly glancing once at her cousins, who stared back with quiet questions in their eyes. Linda whispered a small goodbye, barely audible. Mark did not speak at all. He sat with his eyes lowered, face pale, each breath pressed tight inside his chest. Outside, the cold felt almost clean compared to the air inside. Snow had begun to drift again, softening the neat lines Mark had cleared earlier. The lights behind the curtains wavered steady one moment, dim the next, as if the house itself was unsure how to hold what had just happened. In the truck, Emily leaned her forehead against the window and followed the houses as they passed one by one, their lights quiet and soft in the winter dark. I kept one hand on the wheel, the other resting loosely against my leg, the weight of her words replaying in the quiet between us. By the time we reached home, I knew the night had changed the ground beneath everything. Whatever had been whispered in kitchens and hidden in folders had moved into the open. The engine went still. The air around us held the cold without apology. Snow whispered under my boots as I stepped out, a small, brittle sound carrying through the quiet night. The ground had shifted, and now there was no going back to the way things were. I did not sleep much after that dinner. The house felt too quiet, the kind of quiet that makes every thought echo louder than it should. I lay awake, listening to the heater click on and off each cycle, steady as a slow pulse. Every time the warmth rose, I saw again the look on Mark's face when Emily spoke. His silence, his stillness, the way truth can freeze a room. By morning, the snow had thickened on the yard. Emily hummed softly at the counter while eating her cereal, swinging her legs without a care in the world. That small sound, light and untroubled, nearly broke something open in me. She could step back into childhood, as if the night before had been a brief draft of cold air. I could not step back into anything. The letter in my jacket pocket felt heavier when I took the coat from the hook. I held it in my hand for a moment, before hanging it again, the paper bending slightly under my fingers. The house fell still when my wife took Emily to her sister's place. The silence felt hollow in the way only a recently emptied house can feel. I made coffee and set it on the dining table, though I barely tasted it. My laptop glowed in front of me, washing my hands in pale blue light. The Christmas tree blinked in the living room, slow and uneven. I kept telling myself this was about protecting Dad. But underneath that was something more raw, a sense that one more misstep could tear whatever remained between Mark and me. I typed Gordon Hale's name into every search bar I knew. I did not even know if Gordon was the name he always used, but I had a face and a business card he slipped onto Mark's counter last week. My reflection hovered faintly in the dark parts of the screen. I looked older than I felt, Or maybe I had just trained myself not to look too closely for too long. At first, the searches showed almost nothing. A thin website filled with vague promises. A few polished testimonials that read more like advertisements than lived experience. Then a link appeared from a news archive buried halfway down the page. A report from several years back. An investigation into a trust scheme involving older adults. Most details were hidden behind legal phrasing, but one name appeared in the filings. Gordon Hale. Not convicted. Not charged. Just questioned. Mentioned. Connected in ways that left smoke but no flame. The language in the report was clinical, almost bored. Families who trusted a man who spoke softly about safety and peace of mind. Papers signed too quickly. Assets shifted quietly. Homes sold beneath the weight of confusion and suggestion. The case had dissolved when witnesses backed away exhausted or uncertain. My coffee had gone cold. Outside the window, a neighbor's inflatable Santa sagged in the wind, then rose again as if everything were fine. I stared at the screen until the text blurred. A reasonable man might have stopped there, but Dad's letter sat in my coat, and Mom's unfinished warning echoed in the back of my mind. Something pushed me forward. Not rage. Something steadier than that. Something that felt like responsibility rising to the surface after years of being pushed down. Mark's old laptop sat in my garage beneath a tarp on the workbench. He had left it months ago after asking me to help with photos for his kids. I brought it inside carefully, as if it were fragile. The casing was scuffed and tired. When I turned it on, the fan whined like an old dog trying to rise from the floor. The screen lit and asked for a password. My stomach tightened. This was my brother's life in front of me. Still, I typed the one thing he always used. Our high school mascot and the year we graduated. The laptop unlocked. His email was still logged in. I kept my hands on the keyboard without moving. I could hear the refrigerator humming behind me. The heater clicked again in the hallway. I told myself again this was for Dad. I told myself I was not doing this to start a fight. Then I searched for Gordon's name. A thread appeared immediately. The subject lines were short. Planning. Next steps. Follow up. When I opened the thread, the air left my lungs. They were talking plainly. Not like a son trying to help an aging father. Like two men sharing a deal. One message from Gordon said the power of attorney was done, and the property would be handled next. He used the word handled the way a mechanic talks about a part that needs replacing. Not the home where my father watched cartoons with us every Saturday morning. Another message broke down percentages. A consulting fee due after liquidation. A share of proceeds once the transfer was complete. Mark's replies were brief. He asked about timelines, about discretion, about whether the placement paperwork could be pushed through before complications arose. I read it twice. Each time felt colder. My hands tightened on the laptop knuckles, pressing white against the plastic. It was the same tension I had seen in Mark's hands days earlier. I hated how familiar it felt. I lifted my phone and took photos of the screen. I did not bother to mute the shutter. There was no one in the house to hide from. The clicks echoed softly in the kitchen. Then I sent the images to Grant Foster, the lawyer who had handled the purchase of my home years ago, a man who had known my family long enough to remember Mom's smile. I wrote only a few words. Need to talk. Urgent. He called within minutes. His voice was low and steady. He did not sound surprised. He sounded like someone who had heard variations of this story far too often. He told me the documents could fall under elder financial exploitation. He said the state could intervene if Dad had signed anything while medicated or pressured. He told me to keep every original I could find. Do not confront anyone yet. Do not let Dad sign anything else. And make sure Dad stayed somewhere safe where no one could isolate him. When the call ended, I sat still for a long time. The kitchen light buzzed quietly overhead. The tree lights blinked without rhythm. I could hear my own breath louder than anything else. For years, I had told myself that Mark and I simply saw the world differently. That love showed itself in different shapes. That old grudges were the natural cost of growing up. But the emails left no room for those stories anymore. I closed the laptop slowly. My forearms rested on the table. The wood felt cool beneath my skin. I thought of Dad's porch light flickering as I left his house. I thought of the crooked star on his tree and the unused head chair tucked into the shadows. I thought of Emily's voice asking why we celebrated Christmas if we forgot our elders. Now I knew what they wanted. There was no mistaking it. The talk about giving kids a calmer holiday had been a mask. The polite voices at dinner had been a curtain. Behind it was money. And a man in a gray coat who knew exactly which families to approach. I reached into my jacket and took out Dad's letter. The paper unfolded softly, carrying his quiet handwriting across the page. I held it in both hands. Something inside me settled. Something quiet, but unbreakable. I was done waiting for someone else to do the right thing. Outside, snow drifted in soft sheets covering the street, the roofs the last of the footprints. Inside, the silence shifted. It no longer felt heavy. It felt like the moment right before movement. Grace After Stories said, "The return call came sooner than I expected. I had just closed Mark's laptop and pushed it toward the far end of the table, as if distance might calm the heat rising in my chest. The kitchen light flickered once, then steadied, casting a thin, uneven glow that made the room feel strangely hollow. I stood there with my phone in my hand, listening to the sound of my own breathing, slow but tight, the kind of breath a man takes when he is holding something fragile inside him. Grant Foster did not waste time. His voice came through steady and calm, the kind of voice that helps a man keep his footing when he feels the ground shifting beneath him. He said Dad's power of attorney, signed right after he left the hospital, sat on shaky ground. If Dad had been medicated, or foggy, if he had trusted the wrong person too quickly, there was room to contest capacity. He spoke about patterns the state took seriously. Patterns that looked too much like what I had found in Mark's emails. He paused, not for effect, but because he knew what the next part demanded. He said I needed to take Dad somewhere neutral for a few days, not confrontational, not dramatic, just separate from any pressure. A hotel, a guest room, my place. Anywhere Mark and Gordon Hale could not reach him with a document in hand. He told me to protect every original file I could find, and not to let Dad sign a single page that crossed his path, even if it looked harmless. When I asked what happened if they pushed the property transfer anyway, his voice softened, but the words did not. If they tried to move forward, he would file for an emergency injunction. If we could show coercion, the state could open a criminal investigation. He said time mattered. The longer Dad stayed inside their influence, the harder everything became. He let the silence breathe for a moment. Then he said something that stayed with me long after the call ended. He said he knew I did not want to believe my own brother could do this. But right now my job was to protect my father, and I could deal with the rest when I was ready. When the line went quiet, the house returned to its old stillness, but it no longer felt like the quiet of a winter night. It felt like the quiet left behind when a door closes on something familiar. I stood by the sink and stared at the dark window over it. My reflection looked older than it had that morning, older in a way that had nothing to do with years. Not angry, not afraid, something heavier, something like grief with its sleeves rolled up. The Christmas tree in the living room blinked softly, throwing colored bands of light across the floor. The star at the top still listed slightly to the left. It made me think of Dad's tree's smaller, dimmer bulbs, missing, leaning in a way that suggested the house itself was tired. I imagined him there alone, hearing other families laughing through their windows while he sat in silence. I reached for my coat and felt the rustle of his July letter inside the pocket. The sound tightened my throat. His handwriting had been so calm, almost apologetic, as if steady letters alone could keep the walls from closing around him. I hated how much he had tried to carry on his own. I grabbed my keys and stepped outside. The cold met me hard. Snow had fallen in an even dust across the yard, untouched, except for the faint lines of fresh flakes settling as they fell. The air smelled of pine and chimney smoke, the kind of scent that used to make me think of Christmas Eve when I was a child. Now it only reminded me how quickly warmth could slip out of a home. In the truck, the windows fogged before clearing in slow, widening arcs. I sat with my hands on the wheel while the heater woke up. The decision had already settled into my bones. I was not rushing toward conflict. I was moving toward responsibility. As I drove, the tires pressed through the soft snow with a quiet crunch. Houses drifted past each, offering its own version of holiday cheer. Blue lights along a roofline. A pair of lawn reindeer glowing faintly in the dark. A kid dragging a sled across a yard. The world looked festive, but none of it reached me. On the next street, a thin deer stepped into my headlights. I slowed until it turned and slipped between two houses. My hands stayed still on the wheel, but something in my chest kept moving. Dad's home waited a few minutes ahead. The closer I came, the heavier each breath felt. When I turned onto his street, only a few porch lights glowed. His small, cedar-sided house sat at the end, like always, quiet and sturdy, the kind of home built with more love than money. His porch light blinked the same unsteady blink it had given earlier in the week. I parked at the curb and sat for a moment while the engine idled. Through the window I could see a warm lamp in the living room. The television murmured. A faint laugh track rose, then faded again. He was still awake. I shut off the engine. The sudden quiet felt deeper than the night itself. The snow under my boots whispered as I followed the path he had cleared earlier that day. He had always shoveled the same way, straight lines, precise edges. It was his way of holding on to dignity. My hand rested on the doorknob a moment longer than it needed to. I did not know how to tell him the truth. How do you tell a father he must leave his home for his own safety, not because of age or illness, but because family has failed him in ways he never imagined? I opened the door quietly. Warmth wrapped around me, and the familiar scent of menthol tea drifted through the room. Dad looked up at once. His eyes were clear, sharper than I expected. Concern rose in them before he even spoke. He asked if I was all right. I took off my gloves and sat in the chair across from him. The head chair, the one Mom used to sit in, stood empty near the table. The uneven Christmas lights blinked over his shoulder. I told him I had spoken with a lawyer. His expression shifted not in fear, but in recognition, as if he had known this moment might come. I explained what Grant had said, the signatures, the timing, the pressure, the need to give him space where no one could influence him. Every word felt both necessary and painful. He listened without interrupting. When I finished, he stared at the floor for a long breath. The heater clicked in the corner. The room felt small, filled with years of memory pressing in from every wall. Then he looked up. He asked if I truly believed Mark would do such a thing. Not as accusation, not as denial, just a man trying to understand the ground shifting under his feet. The answer hurt. I gave it anyway. I told him I thought someone was trying. And I thought Mark was letting it happen because he was scared or desperate or simply lost. I told him I would not let anyone gamble with him now. His shoulders eased in a slow, tired way. He looked toward the tree at the dim bulbs and the old ornaments Mom had loved. Then he closed his eyes briefly. When he opened them, the decision was already made. He told me to let him get his coat. He rose slowly, bracing on the armrest. I stood halfway, but he waved me down, wanting to keep the last piece of his independence. I watched him walk to the bedroom, steady but careful. When he returned, he held his coat folded over his arm. For the first time in a long time, he allowed me to take it from him without protest. The light beside his chair cast a warm band across the floor between us, while the rest of the room waited in shadow. In that light, I understood the truth we had crossed into. This was no longer a misunderstanding. It was a line drawn clean across the heart of our family, and none of us would be able to pretend we had not seen it. Christmas morning rose slow and muted, the kind of quiet that feels soft on the surface, but carries weight underneath. I woke before dawn, long before the house stirred. Sleep had never really come, only a thin layer of rest laid over the questions that kept circling my mind. Down the hall, the guest room door sat slightly open. Dad breathed evenly, the steady rhythm of a man who had been holding himself upright for too long and finally allowed his body to let go. I stood in the kitchen with a cup of coffee warming my hands. The wind pressed against the siding, a low push that made the windows faintly tick. The Christmas tree in the living room blinked its slow, uneven pattern, throwing small glints of color across the floor. Nothing felt festive. Everything felt temporary, like the world was waiting for the next movement. My laptop sat open on the table. The folder from Dad's porch camera waited where I had left it. I clicked through the files until the frame of his living room appeared, the soft light from his lamp outlining his shoulders as he leaned over a document. My stomach tightened. I closed the screen and slid it into my bag before the sound in the room could change. Dad stepped out of the guest room while I was pulling on my coat. He looked smaller in the early light, not weaker, just worn in a way he rarely let anyone see. He watched me adjust my gloves, then stepped closer and rested a hand on my arm. "You do what you need to do." There was no hesitation in his voice, only the steady acceptance of a man who had already made peace with the truth. I nodded. It took a breath to steady myself before I kissed the top of his head, the same gesture I used as a boy when he sat in his armchair after long days. Then I stepped out into the cold. Mark's street was already alive when I pulled in. Cars lined the curb. Wrapping paper flashed through the windows. I heard kids shouting from behind the front door, laughter layered with the ripping of gift boxes. It should have been comforting. Instead, it felt like I had arrived late to a play with a script I no longer believed. Warm air hit me the moment I stepped inside, cinnamon and pine, mixing with the sharper scent of brewed coffee. The living room was crowded with color. The kids sat among piles of paper, their excitement pure and bright. Linda sat stiffly on the couch, hands tight in her lap. Mark stood near the fireplace, a new sweater on his phone in his hand, posture sharp. He turned when he saw me. His smile flickered once, then leveled. "You made it." I said nothing at first. I took in the room, the decorations, the untouched head chair at the dining table, the way Linda's gaze kept dropping to the floor. The kids kept tearing paper, their joy sharp, in contrast to the adults who refused to look directly at one another. I told Mark we needed to talk. Quiet, steady. Not a threat, a truth. He glanced at Linda. She did not lift her eyes. He suggested later. I told him now. I set my bag down and placed the laptop on the coffee table. The glow from the screen fell across the loose wrapping paper. A few of the children stopped fidgeting, sensing the shift even before any words were spoken. Mark stepped forward. What are you doing? I opened the file. Dad's living room filled the screen. His shoulders slumped, pen in hand. Linda stood close, too close. Gordon Hale leaned in, coat open, his posture as casual as it was predatory. Their voices carried enough to understand even in the soft murmur. They told Dad the papers would help the family, that it was just to make things easier, that the kids needed stability, college, a future. They pressed the pages toward him again and again, smiles masking the pressure. Dad asked for time. He said he needed to read it. His voice on the recording was tired, but unmistakably clear. Gordon slid the papers back in front of him. Linda echoed his words, adding her own line about the grandkids, about not making things difficult, about signing now for everyone's sake. In the video, Dad pulled the document closer. Gordon's hand followed, the kind of hand that looks steady in daylight but takes control when no one is watching. I watched my father hesitate in his own home, boxed in by two people who should never have been close enough to push him. I felt something in my chest twist. Linda gasped when she saw herself on the screen. Her hand flew to the arm of the couch, her face drained of color. She tried to rise, then sat back down, her breath catching in small, shallow pulls. Mark's face hardened. He moved closer, pointing at the laptop with a tense hand. Turn that off. You had no right to record this. I kept my eyes on him. Dad installed the camera himself. He gave me the access. He wanted someone to know what was going on. Mark's jaw clenched. He opened his mouth, but nothing followed. The video kept playing, filling the silence with the truth none of them wanted named. Gordon's voice came again on the screen. You do not want the kids to lose out, do you? Linda nodded next to him. Her eyes averted, her hands still and tight. The words landed in the room with a weight that felt almost physical. I stopped the video. The silence that followed was different from any silence I had known. Not empty. Heavy. Each person in that room felt it. Linda stared at the tree. Mark stared at the floor. The kids stared at the paper on the carpet, unsure why joy had suddenly thinned in the air. Then a sound drifted from the hallway. A slow step, a pause, another step. I turned before I saw him. Dad stood in the doorway. His coat was on. His expression steady. His eyes moved across the room from Mark to Linda, to the children sitting among their gifts. There was no anger in his face, only a tired clarity, the kind a man wears when the truth has finally stepped into the light, and no one can push it back into the dark. The room held its breath. And in that breath, Christmas stopped being a holiday and became something else entirely. Dad stood in the doorway like a man who chose his moment with care. Not slow, not uncertain, just deliberate. He held his cane in one hand, the other tucked in his coat pocket, as if he were grounding himself. The glow from the Christmas tree behind Mark's couch shifted across his face, warm and steady, and for a quiet second he looked like the man I remembered growing up, the one who could settle a whole room without raising his voice. The living room froze around him. The kids held their toys mid-air paper, half torn, their eyes wide and unsure. Mark looked like a man caught between words, his mouth opening and closing before he let the air out in a tight breath. Linda stayed rigid on the couch, her posture locked fingers curled into the cushion beside her. Dad stepped forward. The cane tapped softly against the floor, a steady sound that didn't ask permission. He took another step, and another, moving with the kind of quiet dignity that made the whole room lean toward him without meaning to. He looked at me first. No gratitude, no apology, just a quiet acknowledgement that whatever stood in front of us now, we were standing in it together. Then he shifted his gaze to Mark. "I'm not as weak as you think." His voice was low, but certain. It didn't need strength to carry. It had truth, and that was enough. He kept his eyes on Mark as he went on. "I've been tired since the hospital. That part is true. Some days my thoughts get tangled. But tired isn't gone, and confused isn't helpless." Mark's jaw tightened. He swallowed hard, eyes dropping to the floor like the words had weight. Linda's breath caught in a small, sharp sound she tried to hide behind her hand. Dad's fingers tightened on the cane, not from fear, but from control. He hated the thing, hated what it signaled, but he used it with purpose now. "I know about the debts." The words were gentle, but they cracked the air clean open. Linda turned pale, her hands pressed into the fabric at her sides. Mark tried to speak, but nothing formed. Dad took another breath, steady and quiet. "I've known for longer than you think. Letters you didn't mean for me to see, calls you didn't realize I could hear. A man my age learns how to listen, without being noticed." Mark lifted his head for a moment, then dropped it again. His shoulders sagged, like the truth had more weight than he could hold upright. Dad looked at him with a kind of sorrow that went deeper than anger. "I kept quiet because I believed you'd find your way. I believed you'd dig yourself out even if it cost you pride. But I never thought you'd reach for my life to pull yourself up." Mark let out a broken breath. Not quite a sob, not quite a denial. Something between the two. He sat down heavily in the chair beside the fireplace, his hands covering his face, before he dropped them to his knees again. "You don't understand," he said, the words scraping. Dad raised a hand. Mark stopped instantly. It wasn't force. It was history. It was the echo of childhood discipline settling into the space between them. Dad let his eyes sweep the room, the scattered paper, the blinking lights, the gifts, the children watching everything with a kind of stunned stillness. He took it all in, as if he were seeing the truth beneath the paint. "I never wanted to be a burden," he said. "After your mother died, I promised myself I wouldn't force either of you to carry me. I held on to too much pride." That's true. But silence only fixes some things. Other times, silence lets trouble grow where no one is looking. His voice thinned for a moment, but came back steady. "I thought staying quiet would let you two stay close. I didn't realize it was giving room for something else." My chest tightened. I had spent years stepping back from Mark, telling myself it was normal that families drift. Maybe that drift was the space where this had taken root. Linda wiped her cheeks, trying to do it without drawing attention. The kids looked at her confused, sensing more than they understood. Dad's gaze shifted to her. "You should have come to me. I've helped men who were strangers. I would have helped you too, but you didn't trust me with the truth." Linda tried to speak. Her voice cracked into silence. Dad leaned a little on his cane, not out of weakness, but clarity. "This isn't finished. There are things I need to say while I still can, and there are choices I will make myself. No one speaks for me, not anymore." The air chilled, despite the warmth of the fireplace. Mark looked up with eyes that held something like regret, something like fear. He didn't try to argue. He didn't even try to explain. Dad turned toward me slightly. "Help me with my coat in a minute. I'm not done talking, but I'm done standing in doorways." I nodded. The tree lights blinked over his face, warm and merciless all at once. The whole room held still around him, waiting, bracing, knowing that whatever he said next would change the shape of this family for good. Snow drifted harder against the windows when I stepped into the living room, a cold blue glow washing over the floor in long, quiet strokes. The air felt dense with pine and damp wool, and the faint metallic chill that comes after someone has walked in from heavy weather. Dad sat at the head of the table with his back straighter than it had been in weeks, one hand resting on his cane, the other steady beside the papers in front of him. His eyes were clear, almost too clear, like the world had sharpened around him instead of fading. Mark sat several chairs down, shoulders shaking in uneven breaths. Linda hovered near him, but did not touch him. Gordon Hale stood behind them with his hands clasped in front of him, his posture stiff, in a way that suggested he was trying to measure the nearest exit. Grant Foster set his briefcase on the table. The thud startled everyone. He opened it slowly, calm, as if this were any other estate meeting, though the room held the kind of tension that made every movement echo. Mark tried to talk first. He pushed himself upright and rushed through a half-built explanation about misunderstandings and pressure and family stress. His voice cracked at the edges. His words scattered like he was reaching into fog. Grant lifted the updated will from the case and laid it on the table. The edges curled slightly, as though they had absorbed the quiet of a drawer for too long. Tucked inside was a note in my mother's handwriting. Soft loops, careful strokes, a weight of memory that hit me before I even read a word. Dad set his palm on the document. This was my choice. Written when my mind was strong. Gordon stepped forward. He tried to speak quickly, a tone meant to sound confident, but Dad turned his head and looked at him with a calm that cut through the noise. The room went still. Gordon's mouth closed without finishing his sentence. Mark stood again, as if the chair had burned beneath him. He insisted everything he had done came from responsibility, from trying to keep things together. He spoke fast, breath tight, his hands twisting as though he was trying to wring sense from his own story. I told him I had seen the emails, every message between him and Gordon, every line about percentages and fast transfers and fees after the sale of Dad's house. His eyes shot toward me, a mix of anger and fear, and something deeper, something like shame. "You do not understand what I have been dealing with." His voice shook. "How many times have you chosen what was easy instead of what was right?" The words left my mouth before I could soften them. For a moment, the whole room fell silent except for the small clock on the wall clicking through the seconds. Grant waited for the quiet to settle before he spoke. "This is no longer a private matter. If your father signed under pressure or confusion, the state may treat this as exploitation, and the consequences will not be light." Gordon let out a small, short laugh. Not amused, more like irritated. He said the entire situation could be resolved quietly, that misunderstandings happen, that accusations have consequences. His tone carried the weight of a man who had rehearsed these lines many times. Dad looked at him the way a man looks at dust, settling on a table he plans to clean. "You should leave before I call the state police." Gordon froze for a beat. His face tightened. Then he straightened his coat and walked toward the door without looking at anyone. Before stepping outside, he turned his head slightly. The truth is not always what people think it is. The line hung in the air like a riddle, with no answer. Then he was gone. Mark sank back into his chair. His hands covered his face, then fell open in a posture that looked like surrender. He whispered something about never wanting to hurt Dad, about trying to keep everything from collapsing. The words came out thin and tired. Dad lowered his head for a moment, as if letting the weight inside him settle. When he lifted it again, his expression carried something older than disappointment. It was the look of a man who had understood more than anyone realized, and for longer than we wanted to believe. I do not want prison for anyone. I do not want this holiday turned into a wound. But the truth stands here, and it will keep standing. He rested his hand on the will, not opening it, only holding it the way a man steadies a memory he is not ready to release. The tree lights blinked softly behind him. The room felt suspended in a fragile stillness. I thought of Mom then. Not a vision, not a sound, just the memory of her silhouette in winter twilight. The way she used to stand by the kitchen window with a dish towel in her hand, watching the first snowfall, as if it carried a message only she could read. Dad drew a breath and looked at me, then at the others. There is a part of the truth none of you know. Not even Daniel. His fingers tightened slightly on the document. His voice lowered steady, but thickened by years he had tried not to show. I kept it hidden because I thought silence would protect this family. I see now that silence has its own cost. What I am about to tell you will change the way we see this Christmas, and it will change the way you see me. He stopped there. The room held its breath, and in that held breath I knew we were standing at the edge of something none of us could take back once spoken. The hallway outside the hearing room still held a faint chill, the kind that lingers after doors close on raised voices and hard truths. I stepped out first, moving slowly, letting my breath settle into something steady. Behind me I heard Dad's cane tap once on the tile, a calm, patient sound, and then the softer, uneven breaths of my brother. None of us spoke as we walked toward the exit. Yet the silence between us felt different, lighter, in a way I had not felt in a long time, as if the room behind us had taken something heavy and kept it there. Driving Dad home, the snow thickened into gentle white lines across the windshield. Streetlights cast warm pools of amber on quiet lawns, each house glowing with its version of Christmas. Dad sat in the back seat with his hands clasped and his gaze turned toward the window. He did not say anything, but the tired heaviness that had lived in his voice for months was gone. What replaced it felt like an exhale he had needed for longer than any of us knew. At the house, I warmed the kitchen and put a pot of beef stew on the stove. It was the same recipe my mother wrote down in her neat handwriting, curled at the edges from years of use. The smell rose slowly, filling the rooms with something soft and familiar. Dad sat at the dining table with his fingers brushing the wood. When I pulled the chair once used by my mother closer to him and told him to sit there, he paused. Then he nodded. The gesture was small, but it felt like stitching a long, frayed seam back together. Emily came in with snow still clinging to her boots. She stood beside her grandfather and pulled a chair closer to his. He looked at her with a tired but honest smile. His hand rested on the back of the chair, as if anchoring himself in the presence of someone who still saw him as strong. Mark arrived later. I heard him standing on the porch before he knocked the soft crunch of snow under shifting feet, the careful breaths of someone searching for the courage to step forward. When he opened the door, The light from inside fell over him, revealing eyes that had not known true rest in days. He did not speak at first. He only looked at me like a man unsure of what he was allowed to say. When he finally spoke, the words barely rose above a whisper. "Thank you for not turning away from us." I did not answer. I simply met his eyes. That was enough. Something tight between us loosened, not undone, but no longer strangling. Dad rose slowly, leaning on his cane. He crossed the room with care and placed a hand on Mark's shoulder. The touch was light, but it carried the weight of everything he had chosen not to shout. Mark bowed his head, the bow of a man who understood exactly how close he had come to losing the people who loved him. We sat at the table without talking about the hearing or the papers or the months of quiet fear. Silence made room for all of it. Mark helped ladle the stew with a carefulness that felt new. Dad ate slowly, closing his eyes once in a while, as if tasting not only the food, but the memory that came with it. Later, we lifted the old star from the box in the closet, the same star my mother bought when I was 7. No one reached for it first. Dad handed it to me. I handed it to Emily. She climbed onto a small stool and placed it on the tree with both hands, her face lit by the warm glow of the bulbs. The room softened around us the way rooms do when people choose kindness over fear. My phone buzzed. It was Grant. I stepped onto the porch to answer. The cold rushed up my arms. He told me the investigation would continue into the new year, that more work lay ahead, but the foundation was strong. I listened and watched the snow settle along the walkway, soft and quiet, like a page waiting for new writing. The future felt uncertain, but not frightening. The truth was already out. That was enough. Inside, Dad stood before the family photograph that had been placed back on the shelf. Mark stood beside him, reaching toward the frame, then stopping before touching it. That small restraint held more sincerity than anything he could have said in that moment. The evening stretched gently as if time had decided not to rush. The fire sank into embers. The tree lights blinked in soft rhythm. Emily leaned against Dad's arm. I dimmed the lamps until only the glow from the tree lit the room. The scent of stew and pine and warm wood drifted through the air, settling into something that felt like home, rebuilt. Looking at my father, then at my daughter, I felt a quiet circle closing. No grand victory, no final verdict, just the truth, and the way each of us chose to move with it instead of away from it. I hung my coat on the hook by the door. The faint click of the hanger sounded like the last stitch being pulled tight. Outside, snow fell in slow, gentle flakes covering the yard in a clean, soft sheet. When I closed the door, the warmth inside followed me all the way to the threshold. That night, under a roof that had held every version of our family, we did the work of saving one another. Quietly, honestly. And for the first time in a long time, that felt like enough.